Paul Bunyan. Growing up, Paul Bunyan was always big. When he was born, his first cries broke every window for miles around, and that was only the beginning. His crib was a rowboat with rockers, and his baths flooded the house until his parents gave up and started washing him outside. But Paul wasn't done growing, not by a long shot. It took the wool from a whole flock of sheep just to knit him one sweater. By the time he started school, he wore potato sacks for socks and used wagon wheels to button his shirts. Of course, so much growing made Paul hungry. He ate 40 bowls of porridge for breakfast, and by the time he was done cleaning up, he was hungry all over again. When Paul was 15, the winter was so cold, even the snow turned blue. One morning, Paul found a young ox half buried in a snowdrift. If that wasn't odd enough, the ox was as blue as the snow itself. "My poor little Babe," he said. And that's how Babe got his name. Paul never found out where Babe came from, but it didn't matter. Paul was just happy to have a new friend. Babe was really strong. In one of their first jobs, Paul hitched him to a crooked road that needed fixing. "Pull," he said, and Babe pulled. The road was pretty stubborn, but so were Paul and Babe. By the time the sun set, they had that road straightened out just fine. "Good work," Paul said to Babe, and Babe snorted back. They made a good team. Starting out, Paul was always comfortable holding an axe. With his very first swing, he cut down a half-grown pine tree. He used it to brush his hair until the needles fell out. When he got older, Paul decided to be a lumberjack. At first, he had only Babe to help him. Paul cut down the trees and Babe pulled them into stacks beside the river. But there was more work to be done, more than even Paul and Babe could do. So Paul hired himself a crew. His most famous workers were his 7 axemen, all named Elmer, which each Elmer weighed over 300 pounds and was over 6 feet tall sitting down. The Elmers didn't chop wood with regular axes. They worked faster twirling the blades around them. Sourdough Sam, the cook, fed Paul's logging crews. Sam's soup kettle was so big he had to row a boat out to the center. At dinner, his cookhouse boys wore roller skates to get from one end of the dining tables to the other. The axemen ate hundreds of flapjacks. Sourdough Sam was always running out of space to make them. So, the blacksmith made a new griddle. A dozen men skated on bacon slabs to grease it. At first, the flapjacks in the middle were too hard to reach. Then, Sam added popcorn to the batter so the flapjacks flipped themselves. The year of 2 winters. It was always cold in the winter. The lumberjacks were used to that, but one year was much colder than the rest. Maybe Paul should have seen it coming. The leaves that fall didn't turn red or yellow. They turned dark blue from the cold. Once the snow started falling, it just wouldn't quit. At first, the lumberjacks cut new paths through the fresh snow every day, but after a while, they let the snow pile up and dug tunnels under it instead. After a month, the snow got so deep, Paul had to dig down just to find the treetops. Looking back, they called it the year of 2 winters. By January, the icicles had reached the ground and started to take root. Shadows froze against walls and couldn't get loose. Lucy, the cow's milk, turned to ice cream before it hit the pail. And lighting fires was no good because the flames froze solid. They were pretty to look at, but weren't worth a lick for warmth. Of course, things weren't all bad. It was so cold even the bedbugs huddled together to keep warm. Scooping them up was quick and easy, so the lumberjacks had clean sheets for once. Nobody got any work done because keeping warm was pretty much a full-time job. The lumberjacks let their beards grow and grow and grow. They kept warm. They wrapped them around like scarves. Even the snowmen needed more clothes than usual. When spring came, Paul cut everyone's beard. The whiskers were stacked up and later stuffed into mattresses. The cracking of the ice went on for weeks. The only people who got any sleep wore 3 pairs of earmuffs to bed. But nobody complained. They were just glad things were back to normal. Moving on. Paul and Babe were happy the long winter was over. After being cooped up for so long, they were eager to stretch their legs. Paul hitched a plow to Babe, and they dug a groove from Round Lake down to the Gulf of Mexico. As the water rushed south, it made a nice wide river. Paul called it the Mississippi. He piled the dirt neatly on one side. There were a lot of stones and boulders mixed in. When he was done, he called the whole pile the Rocky Mountains. On their way back north, Paul and Babe walked through the desert. It was terribly hot, and Paul took to dragging his great axe behind him. The heavy axe cut deeply into the soft sand. At sunset, Paul turned to look behind him. "What a grand canyon," Paul said, and the name stuck after that. Paul and his lumberjacks kept so busy that one day there were no more trees worth cutting down. Some of the loggers liked the look of the cleared land and decided to settle down, but not Paul. He needed more elbow room. And so he and Babe said goodbye to the loggers and headed out west. No one knows where they ended up, and Paul was careful not to leave any footprints behind. But every time you see a big mountain or a deep canyon or a rushing river, you know these things don't happen by themselves. So it's a pretty good bet that Paul Bunyan was there before you.